So this is 22:24 GMT on Friday, the 2nd of October 2020. We're doing the first part of the diagnosis of Lee Street. This is a local East London paper, or used to be. This is not run based on print sale. It is mainly a publication that, like the rest of the local papers, is dependent increasingly on online advertisements and revenue. But this is the headline that is representative of most of the local kind of news outlets distributing their local news, so-called, to the people in the locality. This is called Waltham. It's a Waltham Forest Guardian, but it is now, this one has got a line on top. News from Chingford, Walthamstow, Wanstead, Woodford, Leighton and Leytonstone. Now, this is the paper, Chingford. The Chingford polecat is the name, if memory serves, that the former leader of the Labour Party in the UK, Michael Foot, gave to the arch Thatcherite, completely, absolutely disgraceful racist Norman Tebbit. Tebbit went to the USA, and in April 1990, that is more than 30 years ago, so more than 30 and a half years ago, Norman Tebbit spieled and spewed the so-called cricket test to determine the loyalty of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, mainly Muslims. He was targeting the Muslims. The cricket test. And today, 30 and a half years since then, I mean, that item of racist stupidity and outrage was peddled by the LA Times in April 1990. So I issued a statement which was carried by London, ITV London News. And then I was, not long after that, I was accosted by a number of Metropolitan Police in a car in Stepney. And they hassled me and threatened me verbally. This was directly as a result of my statement, which was carried by the London, ITV London News 30 and a half years ago. So I was the voice of the opposition to the racist and Thatcher's racist regime, because Tebbit was Thatcher's nominated racist envoy at large. And he was poisoning the atmosphere 30 and a half years before Donald Trump lauded the latest racist supremacists. So Norman Tebbit was the one that was leading the racist crusade against Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Muslims 30 and a half years ago. That if the Muslims didn't support the English cricket team, then they were not to be accepted as legitimate residents and members of the community in Britain. So anyone who says that Trump is the one that has started it is wrong, factually wrong. And anyone who says that Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn have failed to take on the racists, let alone to defend the victims and targets of racist mythology and smear, is wrong. Because in 1990, shortly after, it was not long after, the stupid leadership of Michael Foot, just like Jeremy Corbyn, these people really don't have the grasp. They're called so-called left-wingers, socialists. And I observed Foot for longer at very close quarters for most of his tenure than I did Corbyn. After observing Michael Foot as closely as I did for a number of years, I decided that there was no leader coming from the so-called left that would show any understanding of British politics, let alone any understanding of how to install and establish anti-capitalist and fair and anti-racist values in this country. So Foot failed, as did Kinnock. And of course, Foot followed the racist James Callaghan. Callaghan was the definitive, most racist, ignorant leader of the Labour Party in Britain. Not only was he ignorant, racist, but he was stupid politically. The result was that he ushered in Margaret Thatcher. Until Callaghan gave way to Margaret Thatcher, the Tories in this country had no such period, absolutely none. Whatever they had before was much smaller in comparison, in terms of impact, in terms of the reach against society that the Thatcher-fronted brigade established. And among the brigade, of course, was the airlines pilot, the criminal, Norman Tebbit, with his cricket test. And Tebbit was not only anti-Muslim, anti-Asian, he was also anti-Irish and anti-Scots. So what we have today in the front page of the Chingford Weekly, local The Guardian, is 100% no to the Tories' handling of the pandemic. And yet we have Chingford, the successor of Norman Tebbit, Ian the Devil, Dracula Duncan Smith. The fact that Dracula Duncan Smith was not dislodged at the 12th of December 2019 so-called election again shows that despite the trendiness and despite the endorsement of the Labour candidate by the likes of the infant and infantile Owen Jones, who paid several visits to the constituency as if to add his gravitas. Now, Owen Jones and gravitas don't mix. And they actually allowed Dracula Duncan Smith to mobilize a larger kind of collection of campaigners and racist vote gatherers. And Duncan Smith stayed. And the candidate that Lever had put up against him was not effective in articulating the opposition to the narrative. The Duncan Smith, the devil was promoting there, but the narrative that Norman Tebbit had established and left behind. And there was no coherence. There was no solidity. There was no actual emphatic assertion that the Tories, Tebbit, Dracula Duncan Smith, and others represented the opposition to society, attacks on society, attacks on its members, attacks on the values on which societies universally stand and stood. So this should have been an occasion when the Labour Party should have actually made use, political use, democratic use, accountability use, transparency use of this disaster. That's the first one, is the households should stop mixing now. That is a failure of the Conservatives. And then live music venue announces closure after license row. And then alarm at steep rise in COVID infections. All these in the northeast of London. Waltham Forest, Chingford, Walthamstow, Wanstead, Woodford, Leighton, and Leytonstone. These are all parts of the wider northeast of London. So the Waltham Forest is bordering on the Newham on the one hand and Hackney on the other. And then Hackney borders on Tower Hamlets and Newham borders on Tower Hamlets and Hackney. And to the east is Barking Dagenham, east of Newham, Barking and Dagenham. So these are the eastern parts of London, and there is absolutely undeniable failures by the government in controlling, stopping the spread of the pandemic, the virus. And the Labour Party is totally ineffective. And it is as ineffective on this issue as it is on the latest disgusting item of racist, pro-racist, anti-Muslim, anti-Asian, anti-African, anti-refugee plot that Priti Patel has been reportedly scheming. So the headline on The Guardian of Friday, the 2nd of October says, discussed at St. Helena, plan for migrants. We shall go to St. Helena in a minute in the inside pages. There is a 2-page spread on the Guardian about the disgusting plan by Priti Patel to put migrants on boats on the sea. I mean, she couldn't admit to wanting to drown them. If she could, she would definitely do that. But this is the next thing next to the drowning of them. So on page 6 and 7, on pages 6 and 7, the Guardian has got a spread on this whole issue. So the first headline says asylum seekers were a Cummings obsession before offshoring plan. And there is the second biggest headline is the deterrent ideal. What number 10 suggested could be done to discourage arrivals. And there are Jamie Grierson, his home affairs correspondent, and there is a short piece by Helen Davidson, which is headline Human Rights Disaster. Downing Street's plan to consider emulating Australia's offshore detention system for asylum seekers risks creating a fresh human rights disaster. Experts have said for more than 8 years, Australia sent all asylum seekers who arrived in its territory by boat to purpose-built facilities in Papua New Guinea and Nauru, the two islands. The policy consistently drew worldwide condemnation for its failures, including human rights abuses and flouting of international law. Elaine Pearson, Australia Director of Human Rights Watch, said offshore processing has been a human rights disaster that was still causing suffering. She added Australia's harsh refugee policy is now a global model. Graham Thorne from Amnesty International Australia said of the policy, it's in breach of international laws, it's hugely expensive, and ultimately it didn't stop anyone. Now, this is the racist role of The Guardian. It is pretending to be concerned about the racist treatment of the asylum seekers by the Johnson-fronted regime. But the fact that The Guardian has got a tiny piece which only twice mentions international law at all and fails to lead with the list of illegalities and breaches of international law that we have been leading on, we have been focusing on for weeks now, shows that The Guardian is contributing to this racist complacency and racist denial of the duties, obligations that UK as a currently signed up member to all these international declarations, agencies, and conventions, and agreements, and charters. The Guardian should be condemned for intentionally, racistly ignoring the biggest scandal, which is the open flouting of the law, which is far bigger than anything that Johnson is doing with his pro-Brexit kind of denial of the agreement with the EU bill. Because the UK has been flouting and breaking these laws for years. And that should be the leading headline. That should be the leading commentary. That should be the leading narrative in The Guardian. But it isn't. And there is nothing by Keir Starmer about it. And as we have been saying this, Keir Starmer is one of the licensed law traders. Let's say licensed law trader MPs. I mean, he is not the first, quote, barrister MP. There are many others. And common among them is the voluntary silence by all of them on the illegality, unconstitutionality, breaches of the rule of law, breaches of the due process by successive executives, that is, successive governments fronted by either Cameron or Blair or May or now Johnson. So while the ugly, disastrous plan to deport these asylum seekers to the worst possible location possible available to the British, there is no evidence that any of the papers, any of the leading kind of organs like The Guardian, let alone the BBC, is bothering to report the facts. I'm not asking them to invent something and create a pretext to give vent to any prejudice they may have against races, which is a very difficult assumption to make anyway. The Guardian would not ever want to make a pretext to attack a racist with, nor would the BBC. Now we shall come to the role of the BBC and come to the prediction that I made diagnostically, analytically. I made the prediction nearly 40 years ago in a conversation I was having with a journalist, white journalist in that period, whose name was Jonathan Coe, C-O-E. Now there are several Jonathan Coes around, so I don't know whether this one he's still around or he has passed on or whatever. So I said to him, sitting at a talk that I gave at the LSE for his benefit, because he didn't actually have many of the friends that he said would turn up, but he organized the talk by me at the LSE, London School of Economics. It's a room. It wasn't organized by the authorities in the London School of Economics. They would never do that. They would never organize a talk by Muhammad Haq that would question everything that they stood for. But it was a room booked by Jonathan Coe, and I was the speaker. And I spoke at length, as I'm doing now, and I said to him, as part of the analysis of the BBC, about 38 years ago, that the BBC never actually carried out the oft touted mission of telling the truth, speaking the truth to power, and all the rest of it. And that the BBC was the main courier, the main propaganda vehicle of racist lies and mythologies that were damaging the cause of peace and fairness and justice across the world, because the BBC uniquely was the broadcasting outlet that was listened to by most people in the world. There was nothing in the French language spheres of ex-imperialists or in the Spanish language versions, because the Spanish language is one of the highest numbers of people, largest numbers of people speak Spanish, English, and French. That is from the Western kind of imperialist, colonialist kind of standpoints. And remember, Spain may be much behind the British and the French and the German, but the Spanish contributed severe racist imperialism in the world, centuries over centuries, which is why Spanish is spoken by so many people. Most of these speakers are not in Spain. They're outside in the world of the country. And of course, Spain has a bigger, deeper darkness of systematic massacres and genocides of Muslims, not over one period, 1 year, or 1 decade, over a whole 100 years. So, when the Guardian does the 2-page spread about the asylum seekers whose treatment is being termed as disgusting on the front page, the Guardian is not telling the truth about Spain about France, about England, ruining the lives of hundreds of millions of people across the world by empire, by slavery, and by denial. So this is pointless two-page spread by the Guardian. Pointless because it will not change anything. They're giving a list of various things that the desperate racists fronted by Boris Johnson are doing to sabotage the rights of the most desperate people seeking asylum. They're doing the list of various things that the cabal has been up to. But they're not challenging. They're not challenging the legal basis of this misconduct and illegality and criminality. And they're not focusing on Keir Starmer's continuing failure. And they're not, most certainly, going to talk about Jeremy Corbyn's racist legacy. As I have said last week, Corbyn did not even refer to race, racism, ethnicity, massacre, let alone genocide. When he referred to the Burmese massacring, genociding Muslim Rohingyas, Corbyn has proven. I never assumed that Corbyn was that stupid. I said he was intellectually a kind of deficient and challenged. But the fact that he spoke about Rohingya Muslims and he failed to mention race, racism, ethnicity, ethnic cleansing, let alone genocide. And yet, throughout the 5 years that Corbyn has been imposed, news has come out of Burma of various types of persecutions by the Burmese, the Buddhist majority of the Muslim Rohingyas. And it culminated 2 years after Corbyn got in with the news of genocide and massacres of the Rohingyas by the Burmese. And yet Corbyn stayed completely quiet. Whatever he said, he was passing the motion or going through the motions, like doing the formality of showing concern, which takes this commentary all the way back to the 1980s and a bit of the 1990s, when Corbyn used to appear at the York Hall in Bethnal Green in Tower Hamlets. And he was not invited there by Bangladeshis or Muslims or let alone Palestinians, because there is hardly any noticeable presence of politically active Palestinians in Tower Hamlets or in East London. So what Corbyn was doing was appearing as the MP, left-wing MP, to give gratification to his core ACs in the SWP, Socialist W, I would rather not spell it out, party. And Corbyn often spoke about the Palestinians, but he was lying because Corbyn was talking absolute idiocies and racist stupidities and ignorance. Corbyn never related the two things together. The British Empire, imperialism, British plot to disenfranchise, dislocate, and disperse and remove from their homes the millions of Palestinians. It was the British government that created a forever homeless community of people across the world, the Palestinians. Corbyn never addresses that, nor does Ken Lying Still Livingston. So what are these people doing? Who are they kidding? And who does the Guardian think it is kidding? We shall come to that political correspondent or political editor or whatever, Heather Stewart. What is she saying? She is saying in her piece, is the piece, voters may see Tories' asylum plans as sign of dogged determination or complete disarray. Dogged determination is a racist phrase, and disarray is a racist phrase as well. Or disarray is a racist concept, because at the heart of everything the cons are doing about the asylum seekers is the racism. And because of the numbers involved, their anti-Muslim agenda. But Heather Stewart is not going to fault them on either of those. So the Guardian is called the Guardian, but it is absolutely unrecognizable as a so-called liberal daily. Just as the Communist Party's, CPGB's, Morning Star, which boasts of being the world's only English language left-wing daily. What a lot of rubbish. For a start, the world is not being led by English-speaking communists or socialists, because the socialists and communists never put up any resistance against anybody in the world. Whatever is happening in South America and Latin America, we shall skip for the time being, because if we go into it, we will find there is not socialism or revolution that is propelling the so-called left outlets across the Latin American countries. It is the form of political crime and criminality that is actually driving the various factions. And the same case is in Asia. Asia is the biggest continent in the world, but it has got no active, genuine, universally defined or definable socialist revolutionary movement anywhere. But if you read the outpourings of the Australian control, Australia, there is a group of people who are mainly from Australia who claim to be the controllers of the thing called the WSWS.org. I often refer to them strictly as reference, not ever agreeing with them in their narrative. And I cannot agree with them in the narrative because they are in their own way in denial, seriously in denial. And they're in a fantasy land altogether. But when it comes to referring to some of the ongoing activities, it is very revealing to see the headlines given to their coverage, their copies of on the same events, mainly in the USA. But sometimes, as in the case of the first fortnight of February, this 2018, when they published a piece about labor control councils in bed with developers. Well, that headline was completely, absolutely underdone, but it got the facts almost correct, but the analysis was wrong because it didn't actually question the corruption at the heart of the Labour Party throughout history. And it completely kind of left off. It didn't follow up. That story, it didn't follow up. But I have since that time, I have mentioned it many times because I think that is substantially correct, that headline, that the Labour Party in this country is in bed with property speculating criminals and degenerators. And that it has been the case before 2018 and since 2018. And all the evidence points to the fact that the Labour Party never had an economic program for social Britain. There isn't. Despite the fact that John MacDonnell, who got himself stupidity and notoriety by throwing the book of quotations of Mao Zedong at George Osborne. John MacDonnell is no socialist. He's not even a Democrat. He's a cabal person. Like most of the momentum thing that surrounded Corbyn and strangulated him politically as if he needed strangulating, as if he was not self-strangulating enough already. So the Labour Party is divided into various factions, and most of the factions are actually fighting for empty space because all of them are empty in one way or the other, and they have not made any impact against the Conservatives. So how does John Crace of The Guardian justify promoting Keir Starmer? On what basis? Keir Starmer is not doing well compared to Boris Johnson in the so-called polls because of any qualitative contribution. Keir Starmer doing that well, within quotation marks, shows that there is no politics in this country anymore. And Boris Johnson is a dead duck, has been a dead duck for all our analysis, all the way back to 2006 and 7, when he was being groomed to be the contender for London mayor. We have denounced him based on his evidence, based on his record, not because we have an agenda against him at all. We don't. We didn't have then, and we still don't have any against him. But we have an agenda and serious concern about his program or his abuse of society and country and democracy and neglect of the people. That is concerning. And if it wasn't Johnson fronting the cabal, whoever were in his place and doing the same kind of dysfunctioning, negligence, and pandemonium, we would be having critical observations to make about them and against them and against their conduct. So The Guardian has got on asylum seekers 2 pages, 6 and 7. It has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. And the 2 pages center is kind of occupied by 2 women. They're either carrying or leading child each. And these are women who are walking along Kingsdown Beach in Deal in Kent after coming ashore in September. And this is the picture again. Now this woman in the back, the one behind, looks like she's a Muslim. And the question is, recently the supreme leader, so-called, of Iran has apparently given a spiel, apparently explaining why Muslim countries and Muslim nations are doing so badly. And he said that Muslims have lost connection with the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet. Well, this is not a new item. But the point is that the Iranians paid good money to Jeremy Corbyn, Ken Livingston, George Galloway. Now, what on earth did they think they were doing? The Iranians completely disastrously failed, whatever the agenda was, they failed in that attempt to neutralize the British big enemy by giving platforms to these three individuals, because none of them, Galloway, Ken Livingstone, or Corbyn, put together, all of their contributions amounted to nothing, as it was bound to do. Because like Muhammad Fayyad of formerly Herods, Al Fayyad, the Egyptian, the Iranians completely misunderstood the British psychology. If they had instead really funded, genuinely independent campaigns, instead of trying to reap immediately political loyalty to their regime, they would have contributed much better to the understanding of the devil state, which is what they call it. And the devil conservatives and the devil Labour Party post holders. Instead, they bribed Jeremy Corbyn, who issued idiotic script, Ken Livingstone, who issued idiotic speech, as did George Galloway. They didn't amount to value for money in any definition whatsoever. But one thing this did was to destroy the careers of these individuals, or at least the credibility of these individuals. And as Corbyn has proven, his taking the money, which was compared to the money that the Boris Graf has been paying Boris Johnson over the last 12 years or so, the money that the Iranian press TV gave to Corbyn or Ken Livingstone or George Galloway was real peanuts. And it would be peanuts compared to Johnson's money. So why did the Iranians hire these morons and fakers and opportunists and lightweights? Why don't the Iranians fund independent campaigns? They made a mistake with the other guy, Khalim Siddiqui, in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Khalim Siddiqui was another political disaster, abusing the Muslim name. He set up the stupidly conceived Muslim parliament. It was stupidly conceived Muslim parliament, which was already populated by Indian spies. I mean, can you believe that? This guy was doing the Muslim parliament, which had been already overrun by informants serving the Indian spying outlet, the research and analysis wing, and they sabotaged Khalim Siddiqui. But in any case, there is no justification for forming a Muslim parliament in this country. And I'll tell you why. Just as there is no justification, there never was a justification for the racists pretending to be Muslim friendly in Tower Hamlets, promoting Lutfur Rahman as the mayor candidate. Because the main body of the people in Tower Hamlets that they actually base these idiotic ventures on are themselves indifferent to the requirements of Islam, let alone the kind of adherence to the basic standards of Islam. There are Muslims, but inside the Muslim community in Tower Hamlets, there is no Islamic terms of reference. The behavior is absolutely as anti-Islamic as it can be. So anyone who says that there is a big kind of radical Muslim community in Tower Hamlets is making a treble lying assertion. And Lutfur Rahman, being found to have been a corrupt mayor, put paid to any slogan that there was a Muslim ummah in action in Tower Hamlets. There is not. There is not. The East London mosque, which has been given a renewed license, an endorsement by Kate and Williams recently, is not representing the Muslims of Tower Hamlets. No way. The East London Mosque is not a democratic outfit. And the people involved in the running are secretly operating, secret in the sense that they don't have open proceedings open to all Muslims. It's a cabal, it's a kind of secret society they're running, and they have been running. Who controls it? It's not officially known, but people who are in the community have a good idea as to who is still running the place. And it is not serving the Muslim community. Because despite Andrew Gilligan painting the East London Mosque and the London Muslim Centre as a triangular kind of outfit, along with what is called Islamic Forum Europe, which had plotted to impose Lutfur Rahman as the mayor candidate and make him elected, or let him get elected, or help him get elected as the mayor in Tower Hamlets. Those people have shown no capacity whatsoever to publicly confront the allegations made against them by Andrew Gilligan. They have filed various complaints with various bureaucratic outfits, but they have not issued an item by item rejoinder to the allegations made by Andrew Gilligan, Channel 4, or the Daily Borisgraph. And the same applies to the London Muslim Centre and the so-called IFE, which remains to me, still remains completely a mysterious outfit, but it only has substance when mentioned in relation to the London Muslim Centre and the East London Mosque. So let's say that those two outfits, London Muslim Centre and the East London Mosque, are remotely Islamic. Where is their activities countering the anti-Muslim agenda narrative that have been ongoing right from the beginning of this century and long before the beginning of this century? When the East London Mosque was sited, well, East London Mosque as it is now was sited in the Commercial Road. It was a small building. Very small building. And most Muslims went there without any problem of being associated with any faction or whatever. For a very long time, the East Mosque in East London, the main mosque in East London, that is the Commercial Road Mosque, was a mosque like any ordinary mosque in most Muslim countries. But something happened, and this huge kind of structure, complex, began to be started in the 1980s in Whitechapel Road. And it's a big structure compared to anything else that Muslims have. And yet Muslims don't have open access to, let alone say, on who are the people in charge, in control, and what is their agenda, who is running them, who are they accountable to, anything like that. Why is that? Aren't there Muslim-owned, quote, media in this country? Of course there are. but they don't have any interest whatsoever in examining the evidence of what the London Muslim Center is doing or is up to. And unless they are, the London Muslim Center, the East London Mosque, and whatever else is involved with them will not be serving the cause of Islam. And it will not be any different from the stunt that Khalim Siddiqui was associated with Muslim Parliament. How dare he even suggest that Muslims in this country were ready and willing and able, ready, willing, and able to man and woman a thing called the Muslim Parliament. How dare he? Because as Siddiqui was mounting his propaganda, which was obviously aided by the then Iranians, whoever the controllers in Iran were, because Siddiqui got significant support from Iran. What the details are is not important. He was supported by Iran. And the Iranians, like Al-Fayed, had shown nothing but contempt for the Muslims, ordinary Muslims, migrants in this country. And they still are contemptuous. They've got this Iranian called Varsi. Now, Varsi was living in Brighton when I published The Spokesman. And Varsi sent a congratulatory letter to me as the editor of The Spokesman in the early 1970s. Now, Varsi is now a big magnate, a big important person now. But he is a mental slave. He is a mental slave, and the Iranians know it. And they still think that he's their effective kind of platform, his Muslim News, which is a grotesque distortion of the real situation of the Muslims in this country. It has been. And I initially supported this Muslim News. And when I caught Varsi lying, I stopped supporting him. If Varsi is viewing this, whenever he's doing this, let him reply to me. So there is an emptiness in this country among the Muslims who are the first kind of target of the onslaught by racists, because racists doubly target Muslims and also as mainly Asian and African. And there is no organized platform to resist the racists. Instead, the Muslims are being divided, bifurcated, separated, segregated based on nationality, ethnicity, whatever. And most of these segregators, most of these dividers are regimes abroad. Now, my thesis is that Muslims who came to this country belong here. Muslims who settled here, okay, settlement for Muslims against racism is a controversial, contentious kind of claim to make, and that is something which we shall be addressing in due course every day. But the point is that Muslims belong here, their homes are here. And the belonging and the settlement and the identity as Muslims in Britain is not enhanced by morons like Khalim Siddiqui founding an Islamic parliament or Muslim parliament, because that is not possible. It may be possible 100 years from now, 200 years from now, but that is not something that is within the slightest realm of possibilities now. And it wasn't in 1988, 89, 90. I gave a long long statement on LBC radio or whatever it was called at the time against Khalim Siddiqui. I denounced the Muslim parliament not because I opposed the idea of Muslims having a democratic platform, but I denounced this because he was misleading the non-Muslim public as well as the rest of the Muslim community by making a claim that was totally false, untrue, and he didn't have any respect for Muslims. He never carried anything in his so-called journal before the Muslim parliament stunt that Muslims were experiencing day to day in housing, in education, on the street, on the transport, and generally, and in the media, the exclusion of the media of Muslims. So we shall be continuing, and this is coming to probably just under 1 hour. So this has been part A of the diagnosis of the British media Fleet Street. In the second part, we shall be looking at Bangladesh and the gang rape of the 19-year-old girl, a married 19-year-old girl, by several members of the organization that belongs to the party that has been in control of Bangladesh for the last, 11 years, I think. And that is something that is part of our independent campaign. And the campaign is Stop Rape in Bangladesh. Stop Rape in Bangladesh. That's it. And that includes all the details. No rapist shall live in Bangladesh. Let them find another home, somewhere else, but not in Bangladesh. And everything that the various spokespersons have spieled, expressing alleged concern about these rapes, this gang rape in Sylhet MC College, everything has been intentionally designed to give the impression that they are concerned, that they are actually doing something. And that is not what the victims of rape and injustice deserve. That is not what free, liberated Bangladesh offered. Bangladesh's test is now, the independence Bangladesh's test is in the fact if rape is abolished, eradicated, stop rape in Bangladesh. How about that? We shall be attempting evidential, empirical, social, reasonable, economic, ethical, historical outlines and supports and justifications for this movement that we are calling Stop Rape in Bangladesh. Let Bangladesh be the leader as a country, as a society, as a country, as a people of liberation of all victims of rape everywhere in the world. Stop rape in Bangladesh, and then hopefully stop rape everywhere. That is the slogan coming to you from myself, the organizer of the Khudilar campaign, Muhammad Haq, and on the online Khudilar TV channel. This is coming to just 1 minute, I think, before 1 hour since we came on air, I think. And we shall be coming on air in part 2, not long after this break. We are taking a break for about 20 minutes. So we shall be coming back. This is 23:24 GMT on Friday, 2nd of October 2020. Stop rape in Bangladesh.